Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, a title held, of course, by his late father, Prince Philip, for more than 70 years. It had been the late Prince's wish for Prince Edward to be granted the dukedom after his death.
For years, the inner circle of the monarchy has guarded its secrets with precision, but every so often, something slips through the cracks. This time, it wasn't a rumor. It was an alleged breach that struck at the heart of royal privilege. Reports began to swirl that Queen Camilla's own son had crossed a forbidden line, using King Charles's estate in a way that raised serious legal questions. But what truly stunned insiders was Prince Edward's unexpected response. So, what exactly did Prince Edward do? How did Tom Parker Bowles get to use the estate in the first place? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. To help us create more videos and uncover the latest royal drama, please subscribe. A quiet palace, a loud secret. Behind the polished smiles and carefully controlled public image of the British royal family, something far more unsettling began to take shape. At first, it was nothing more than murmurs, barely noticeable, easily dismissed. But over time, those whispers grew louder, forming a story that refused to stay hidden. At the center of it all stood Queen Camilla, her son, and the deeply private world of King Charles III, a world few are ever allowed to truly see. What made this situation so compelling was not just the people involved, but the nature of the claims themselves. This was not a typical family misunderstanding or a harmless disagreement behind palace doors. Instead, it unfolded like a layered mystery, one that hinted at secrecy, influence, and the quiet exercise of privilege in ways that raised uncomfortable questions. The deeper one looked, the more complex it seemed. At the heart of the matter lay a startling allegation that royal property, spaces tied not only to immense wealth, but also to history, tradition, and personal significance, had been used without proper approval. These were not ordinary places. They carried meaning, legacy, and in many ways, the identity of the monarchy itself. To imagine such spaces being accessed or used casually without clear permission challenged long-held assumptions about how the royal household operates. Yet, the issue went beyond the physical use of property. It pointed towards something more subtle, yet far more troubling: a mindset. There appeared to be an underlying suggestion that for certain individuals, especially those closely connected to power, the usual rules might not fully apply. Whether spoken or unspoken, this belief carried serious implications. It raised the question of accountability in an institution built on tradition, duty, and public trust. As the story continued to unfold, it became less about a single incident and more about what it represented. Was this an isolated lapse in judgment? Or was it part of a broader pattern that had gone unnoticed, or perhaps unchallenged for years? The silence surrounding the matter only added to its intrigue. In a family known for its strict control over public narratives, the lack of clear answers created space for speculation to grow. Observers began to look more closely, not just at the individuals involved, but at the structure that allowed such a situation to emerge. The monarchy, often seen as a symbol of stability and continuity, suddenly appeared more fragile, more human, and perhaps more vulnerable to the same flaws found in any powerful institution. The contrast between its public image and these emerging claims made the story even more captivating. In the end, what began as a quiet rumor evolved into something far more significant, a narrative that challenged perceptions, raised difficult questions, and invited people to reconsider what truly happens behind palace walls. Whether fully proven or not, the mere existence of such claims was enough to shift the conversation, leaving many to wonder where the line truly lies between privilege and responsibility. Where and when did the unexpected happen? How did everything unfold? Who initiated the conversation? Let's find out. The night everything changed. The strain that had long lingered beneath the surface finally revealed itself during a distinguished evening gathering at St. James's Palace. This was far from a casual social event. Every detail had been carefully arranged to reflect prestige and influence. The guest list included powerful individuals, people who not only understood status and hierarchy, but also recognized how fragile and significant reputation could be in such circles. The atmosphere carried a quiet intensity. Conversations were polished, smiles were measured, and every word seemed chosen with intention. Beneath the elegance, there was an unspoken awareness that moments like this could shape perceptions, alliances, and even futures. It was within this charged setting that Tom Parker Bowles decided to act. He approached Prince Edward with composure, his demeanor calm and controlled. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. His tone was courteous, even respectful. Yet, as he began to speak, there was an edge beneath his words, subtle but unmistakable to those who were paying close attention. He spoke about titles, about their meaning and their place in the modern world. On the surface, it sounded like a thoughtful reflection, the kind often shared in elite discussions. But there was more to it. Beneath the politeness lay a pointed suggestion that titles alone no longer held the weight they once did. Then came the sharper implication. Tom hinted that real influence was not tied to tradition or inherited status, but to something far more practical: control, access, and the ability to shape outcomes. Without directly saying it, he challenged the very foundation of Edward's authority, especially when it came to royal estates. The message, though delivered with care, was unmistakable. It questioned whether Edward's position truly carried the power it appeared to hold. For a brief moment, time seemed to pause. The surrounding conversations faded, replaced by a heavy silence that settled over the room. Those nearby understood immediately what had just unfolded. This was not a casual exchange of ideas. It was something far more deliberate. Eyes shifted subtly. Some guests avoided looking directly at the two men, while others watched with quiet curiosity. No one intervened. In a setting like this, such moments were rarely interrupted. They were observed, analyzed, and remembered. Prince Edward, known for his composed nature, was now at the center of an unexpected challenge. The situation demanded a response, yet any reaction, whether calm or forceful, would carry its own consequences. In a room filled with influential figures, even the smallest gesture could be interpreted in many ways. What made the moment even more striking was the way it was delivered. There were no raised voices or dramatic gestures. Everything stayed calm, controlled, and carefully measured. Yet that calm restraint made the moment feel even stronger. It showed deep confidence and quiet authority, a readiness to challenge without open aggression. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost louder than any spoken reply. Everyone in the room could feel that something important had just happened. It was clear that boundaries had been set, not through shouting but through careful words and planned intent. This was not a normal exchange or casual talk. It was a quiet confrontation, firm yet controlled, one that left a lasting mark on everyone who witnessed it. No one could ignore the weight of what had unfolded. Even though nothing loud or explosive happened, the impact was deep and undeniable. It was the kind of moment that would be remembered long after the room had gone silent again. It lingered in thought and conversation long after the people had moved on. Because some words are not spoken again, yet they change everything quietly and forever. This was one of those moments, indeed, powerful and unforgettable. What is Tom Parker Bowles' position in the royal family? Why did he seem to hang around the corridors of the royal family? Let's delve into the details of Tom's true position, a royal adjacent. Although Tom Parker Bowles is linked to the British royal family through his mother's marriage to King Charles III, his position within that world is quite unique. He is not considered a working royal, and he does not carry any official title, duty, or constitutional responsibility within the monarchy. Because of this, his place is often best understood as being royal adjacent. In simple terms, he is connected to the royal family by personal ties, yet remains outside its formal structure and expectations. Rather than stepping into royal duties, Tom has deliberately carved out his own path. He has built a strong and respected career as a food writer, restaurant critic, and broadcaster. Over the years, he has contributed to major publications, written several cookbooks, and appeared on television and radio, all based on his expertise and passion for food. What stands out most is that his success has come from his own efforts, not from leveraging royal connections. This independence has helped him earn credibility in his field and be recognized for his work on its own merit. Unlike senior members of the royal family, whose lives are often shaped by tradition, public service, and constant media attention, Tom enjoys a greater sense of personal freedom. He is not bound by royal protocols, official schedules, or ceremonial roles. This allows him to move comfortably between different social and professional circles, whether in the media, culinary world, or public life. He can express himself more openly and live with fewer restrictions than those who officially represent the crown. Even so, his connection to the royal family is not distant or strained. Tom maintains a close and supportive relationship with his mother, Queen Camilla, and he is occasionally seen at important royal gatherings or events. His presence at such occasions reflects family ties rather than official duty. It is a reminder that while he is not part of the monarchy's working system, he is still very much part of its extended family network. Interestingly, Tom has been very clear about how he sees his own place in relation to the royal family. Over and over again, he has said that he does not see himself as an official part of the monarchy in any formal way. For him, his identity is not defined by royal titles or family connections, but by the life he has built for himself through his own efforts and achievements. This way of thinking shows that he prefers to be recognized for who he is as an individual rather than as someone linked to royal status. It also highlights a strong sense of independence, where he chooses to stand apart from the expectations, duties, and constant public attention that usually come with royal life. By taking this position, he is making a conscious decision to live a more private and self-defined life, shaped by personal goals rather than royal tradition or obligation. Ultimately, this outlook helps him protect his peace of mind and build a life that feels more authentic to him, even if it means stepping away from public expectations and the spotlight that often follows royal connections in his own chosen way over the years ahead forward. In many ways, Tom Parker Bowles represents a modern and evolving version of what it means to be connected to royalty. He stands at the intersection of tradition and independence, linked by family, yet guided by his own ambitions and values. His life highlights a different way of relating to the monarchy, one that does not depend on titles, duties, or inherited roles. Overall, his story offers a refreshing contrast to the more structured lives of senior royals. It shows that it is possible to be part of a famous and historic family while still maintaining individuality, privacy, and professional independence. Tom's journey is not about royal privilege, but about defining success on one's own terms. In the middle of the whole scene, what was Edward's response to Tom Parker Bowles's drama? What happened afterwards? Let's dive into the details of Edward's cool response. The man who refused to react. Prince Edward's response caught everyone off guard, not because of what he did, but because of what he chose not to do. In a moment where many would have reacted instantly, perhaps with sharp words or visible frustration, he remained completely still. There was no argument, no raised voice, no attempt to defend himself on the spot. Outwardly, it seemed as though he had simply let the moment pass. But that quiet reaction was far from empty. His silence was not weakness, nor was it uncertainty. It was deliberate. It carried a quiet intensity that spoke louder than any immediate reply could have. This was the silence of a man who understood the power of restraint, who recognized that not every situation demands a quick reaction. Instead, some moments require patience, reflection, and careful judgment. Edward stood there composed, his expression controlled, revealing little of what was going on beneath the surface. Yet internally, his mind was active. He was observing, assessing, and thinking several steps ahead. He understood that reacting impulsively, especially in a tense or emotionally charged situation, could easily play into the hands of the other person. And in this case, that was exactly what Tom might have been hoping for: a reaction, a spark, something that could escalate the situation further. By choosing stillness, Edward denied him that satisfaction. However, this was not a moment he would simply forget. Beneath that calm exterior, something had shifted. What had been said or implied was not just a casual remark or a minor personal slight. It carried deeper meaning. It touched on something larger than the two individuals involved. The insult had implications that extended beyond personal boundaries. It hinted at a challenge to something more structured, more significant, something tied to roles, respect, and perhaps even long-standing traditions. Edward understood this clearly. That was why he did not rush to respond. He knew that moments like this were not meant to be handled carelessly or in haste. A quick reaction might provide temporary relief, but it could also lead to consequences that were difficult to undo. And Edward was not someone who acted without considering the broader picture. His silence, then, became a form of control. It allowed him to maintain dignity in the moment, while giving himself the space to decide what truly needed to be done. It was a pause, but not an ending. In many ways, it marked the beginning of something else, a shift in perspective, a quiet acknowledgement that the situation required more than just words. There was a growing awareness within him that this could not be ignored indefinitely. While he had chosen not to respond immediately, he also understood that silence, if prolonged without action, could be misinterpreted. The issue would have to be addressed, but in the right way, at the right time, and with the right approach. For now, though, Edward remained composed, still, silent, but far from inactive. Because sometimes the most powerful move is not the one made in the heat of the moment, but the one carefully prepared in its aftermath. So, what was Prince Edward's next move? Did he make any revelations? Let's dig into the details of Edward's effort in seeking the truth. A journey to the truth. The very next morning, Edward made his move. There was no public notice, no formal announcement, and certainly no hint to the press. Everything about his decision was deliberate and controlled. Under the simple excuse of carrying out a routine inspection, he set out for Sandringham House. To an outsider, it might have seemed like just another duty, one of many quiet responsibilities carried out behind the scenes. But this visit was different. Edward was not going merely to observe. He was going to confirm a growing suspicion. Sandringham was no ordinary residence. It held a unique place in royal life, steeped in history and meaning. For generations, it had served as a private retreat for the royal family, a place where traditions were preserved and memories quietly lived on. It was where monarchs stepped away from the public eye, where Christmases were celebrated, and where moments of reflection unfolded away from the pressures of duty. Every room, every corridor carried echoes of the past. It was a place that demanded respect, not just because of its beauty, but because of what it represented. As Edward arrived, there was an unusual stillness in the air. At first glance, everything seemed as it should be. The structure stood proudly, unchanged in its outward appearance. But as he stepped inside and began to walk through the familiar halls, a sense of unease began to grow within him. It was not something obvious or immediate. Instead, it revealed itself slowly, in small and easily overlooked details. His eyes moved carefully across the polished floors, once kept in perfect condition. Now, faint scratches marked their surface, marks that did not belong. They were not the result of careful, respectful use. They suggested carelessness, perhaps even disregard. Edward paused, taking it in, his mind already beginning to piece things together. Then there was the air itself. a strange scent lingered, unfamiliar and out of place. It clung to the rooms in a way that felt intrusive, as though something foreign had settled into a space where it did not belong. Sandringham had always carried a certain atmosphere, one shaped by its history and careful upkeep. This was different. This was something new, something that did not fit. As he continued his walk, each step seemed to reveal more. Nothing was dramatically out of order, yet nothing felt entirely right either. The subtle signs began to connect, forming a quiet but undeniable pattern. This was not the natural wear of a lived-in home. It was something else, something careless, something disruptive. Edward stopped for a moment, allowing the weight of the realization to settle. This was not how Sandringham was meant to be treated. This was not the quiet preservation of tradition. It was a disturbance, a shift from what had always been carefully maintained. What he was seeing was not just change. It was a violation of something deeper, something unspoken but deeply understood. And as that thought settled in his mind, one thing became clear. This was not normal use. This was a disruption. But what more did Prince Edward discover? Did he really get the facts he was seeking? Let's take a closer look at another discovery that has been in the background: the hidden pattern. Edward did not rush to conclusions. Instead, he chose a quieter, more careful path, one that relied on facts rather than assumptions. He began going through records, line by line, document by document, with the kind of patience that often reveals what haste would miss. At first, everything appeared ordinary, almost routine. But the deeper he looked, the more a pattern began to form, subtle yet impossible to ignore. What caught his attention were a series of entries labeled private events. On the surface, the phrase seemed harmless, even expected within a royal estate that occasionally hosts discreet gatherings. However, there was something unusual about these records. They were vague, offering little to no detail about the purpose of the events, the individuals involved, or the authority under which they were approved. Even more striking was their frequency. These were not isolated occasions. They appeared again and again, stretching back over several months in a way that suggested consistency rather than coincidence. Edward found this deeply unsettling. Official royal events are usually documented with precision, names, purposes, approvals, and protocols clearly outlined. These entries lacked all of that. There were no familiar royal names attached, no visible signs of formal authorization, and no clear explanation as to why such events were taking place so regularly. It was as though something had been carefully concealed in plain sight. Still, records alone were not enough. Edward knew that documents could only tell part of the story. To understand what was truly happening, he needed to hear from those who had been present, those who had seen things unfold behind closed doors. So he turned to the staff. At first they were hesitant. Their reluctance was obvious, their words measured, as though each sentence carried a risk. But gradually, piece by piece, the truth began to emerge. What they revealed added a new and troubling dimension to Edward's findings. According to their accounts, these so-called private events were not random or harmless gatherings. They were being organized by Tom Parker Bowles. The name alone carried weight, but what mattered more was the nature of the events themselves. They were attended by a select group of influential individuals, figures from the worlds of business, media, and the culinary industry. This was not casual socializing. These were carefully curated gatherings involving people of status and influence. What disturbed Edward most was not just who attended these events, but where they were held. The locations were among the most private and restricted areas of the estate, spaces not typically opened for unofficial use, let alone repeated gatherings of this nature. These were places meant to be preserved, respected, and protected. At that moment, the situation became impossible to dismiss as a misunderstanding. This was not a one-time oversight or an innocent mistake. The consistency, the secrecy, and the choice of location all pointed to something far more deliberate. What Edward uncovered was not accidental misuse. It was a pattern, carefully arranged, repeatedly executed, and intentionally maintained over time. A system had been operating quietly within the estate, hidden beneath layers of vague records and silence. And now that it had come to light, it demanded to be confronted. So, what was the moment that changed the entire atmosphere of the palace? How did this happen? Who was behind it? Let's find out. The transformative 5 words. Then, just when the situation seemed complicated but still manageable, a single document surfaced, and everything changed. It was not loud or dramatic at first glance. In fact, it looked ordinary. A formal catering order, neatly prepared, professionally structured, and signed with a level of confidence that suggested nothing was out of place. But as Edward examined it more closely, one particular line stood out. It was an approval note, short and direct, almost easy to overlook. It read, "Property released for use by family directive." 5 simple words, nothing more. Yet those few words carried a weight far greater than their size. They were carefully chosen, almost calculated. On the surface, they sounded official, even routine. But beneath that calm tone was something far more serious, something deeply misleading. The phrase "family directive" was especially powerful. It hinted at authority, at permission granted from within the highest levels of the royal household. It created the impression that this was not a personal decision or an informal arrangement, but something sanctioned, approved, by someone whose word carried undeniable power. And yet, no name was mentioned. No clear source of that authority was identified. To an ordinary observer, or even to someone familiar with royal procedures, the meaning would seem obvious. The king must have approved it. Who else could a family directive refer to in such a context? The wording was vague enough to avoid direct accountability, but strong enough to suggest legitimacy. It walked a fine line between truth and assumption, and that was precisely what made it so effective and so troubling. But Edward was not just any observer. He understood how these systems worked, how authority was granted, and more importantly, how it could be misused. As he read the document, he recognized immediately that something was not right. This was not a harmless shortcut or a minor misunderstanding. It was something far more deliberate. This was not simply bending the rules to make things easier. It was presenting something in a way that could easily be mistaken for official approval when, in reality, no such clear approval had been given. It was, in essence, creating authority where none had been explicitly granted. And that changed everything. Because once authority is misrepresented, especially in a setting tied to royal property, the issue moves beyond internal disagreement. It enters a space where legal and ethical boundaries are at stake. Documents like this are not just pieces of paper. They carry weight, responsibility, and consequences. They influence decisions, justify actions, and shape perceptions. Edward understood that allowing such a document to stand unchallenged would set a dangerous precedent. It would mean that vague language and implied authority could be used to bypass proper processes. It would blur the lines between what is permitted and what is merely suggested. And so, what might have seemed like a small administrative detail quickly became a matter of serious concern, not because of what was written, but because of what was implied. What happened that sent shockwaves to the palace foundations? Who blew the whistle? When and how? Let's find out. The palace revelation that shook the palace. The missing piece of the story did not come from an outsider, a journalist, or even a formal investigation. It came quietly from within the very walls where loyalty is expected to be unquestioned. A long-serving staff member, someone who had witnessed years of royal routine and discretion, finally spoke up. Their voice carried hesitation, their body language tense, as though each word weighed heavily on their conscience. What they revealed shifted everything. According to this insider, the approvals for the questionable activities were not accidental, nor were they the result of confusion or miscommunication. They had been given deliberately, and more strikingly, they had come directly from Queen Camilla herself. She had not only permitted the events to take place, but had actively authorized them. Instructions were passed down clearly to members of staff: cooperate fully, ensure everything ran smoothly, and most importantly, keep the matter away from the king. It was not framed as a suggestion, it was a directive. That single revelation transformed what might have seemed like a simple administrative issue into something far more complex and troubling. This was no longer about whether procedures had been followed correctly, or whether someone had overstepped a boundary. It became a question of intent. Why was such a decision made? And why was there a deliberate effort to keep it hidden? The weight of this truth settled heavily on those who became aware of it. Within any institution, especially one built on tradition, hierarchy, and trust, such actions carry deep consequences. Trust is not just a value, it is the foundation upon which everything else stands. When that trust is quietly bypassed, the ripple effects can be far-reaching. What made the situation even more delicate was the timing. King Charles was already facing personal challenges, a period that required unity, honesty, and support from those closest to him. In moments like that, the expectation is that those within one's inner circle act with transparency and care. Instead, decisions had been made behind closed doors without his knowledge at a time when he was most vulnerable. For many, this shifted the emotional center of the issue. It was no longer simply a matter of policy or protocol. It became deeply personal. The idea that such significant actions could occur without the king's awareness raised difficult questions about communication, loyalty, and the true dynamics within the royal household. As the implications began to unfold, it became clear that this was not an isolated incident that could be quietly resolved or overlooked. The layers of secrecy, the involvement of high authority, and the deliberate exclusion of the king all pointed to something far more serious. It demanded attention, reflection, and, perhaps most importantly, accountability. In the end, what started as a puzzling situation evolved into a profound moment of reckoning, not just about property or permissions, but about trust, relationships, and the unseen decisions that shaped them. How was the drama resolved? Who gave the final verdict? What was the conclusion? Let's delve into the details of the verdict that transformed the narratives. The decision that changed everything. Prince Edward did not hesitate when he returned to Buckingham Palace. While others had chosen to remain silent or look away, he made a different decision, one that would quietly reshape the atmosphere within the royal household. Without delay, he requested an audience with King Charles III and laid out everything he knew, holding nothing back. There was no attempt to soften the message, no effort to protect reputations at the expense of truth. It was a moment defined by clarity and courage. What followed was neither chaotic nor dramatic on the surface. Instead, it unfolded with precision and restraint, the kind that reflects the inner workings of a long-established institution. Permissions that had once been taken for granted were suddenly withdrawn. Lines of access were tightened. Quiet inquiries began behind closed doors, led by those entrusted with safeguarding the integrity of the crown. Positions were reconsidered, responsibilities reassigned, and boundaries firmly redrawn. Inside the palace, the change was unmistakable, even if it was not loudly announced. For years, an unspoken culture had allowed certain matters to remain hidden, protected by layers of tradition and discretion. That culture began to shift. The silence that once acted as a shield started to lose its strength. In its place, a new tone emerged, one that placed greater weight on responsibility and transparency. This transformation did not happen overnight. nor did it come without discomfort. For individuals like Camilla and her son Tom Parker Bowles, the ripple effects were deeply personal. Yet the situation had grown beyond any single individual. It had become a test of the institution itself, its values, its resilience, and its willingness to confront difficult truths. At its heart, this was not merely a story of internal conflict. It was about what happens when long-standing systems are challenged from within. Institutions often pride themselves on continuity, on preserving traditions that have lasted for generations. But moments arise when those same traditions can stand in the way of necessary change. In such moments, the real strength of an institution is revealed, not in how well it maintains appearances, but in how honestly it responds to pressure. Prince Edward's actions highlighted this distinction with striking clarity. He did not act out of impulse or personal gain. Rather, he recognized the weight of the moment and chose to respond with integrity. By stepping forward when others remained still, he forced a reckoning that could no longer be delayed. In the end, the consequences extended far beyond immediate decisions or internal adjustments. Something deeper had shifted within the palace walls, a renewed understanding that accountability could no longer be quietly set aside. It marked the beginning of a subtle but lasting change, one that would influence how matters were handled moving forward. Few could have predicted that such a turning point would come in this way or from this figure. Yet history often moves through the actions of those willing to stand firm when it matters most. And in this case, Prince Edward's choice became exactly that, a defining moment that altered the course of events and left a lasting imprint on the institution he chose to protect. So, what do you think about the estate Tom Parker Bowles illegally used? Did you ever imagine that Edward really saw the cracks? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.